Our very first session for tonight is our good friend, Mr. Tim, and he's going to be talking to us about the upcoming version 5.5 of WordPress, slated to be released in early August. There's quite a few new features in here, including block editor features, device preview, performance, and I'm excited to take a look under this version before it comes out. To tell you briefly about Tim, he works at iThemes Nexus, and he's part of the iThemes security team. He's also a core contributor into the WordPress REST API components area. And you can find him at timothybjacobs.com and Twitter. And he's does have timothybjacobs.com, and he tries to put some articles about WordPress development there pretty frequently. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tim.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen here. As Maria mentioned, WordPress 5.5 is slated for release soon. It's slated for release August 11th. So in just a couple of weeks. Let's make sure I get the right window here. There we go. So I'm going to walk through a couple of different things, a couple of different features in WordPress 5.5. One of the first things that I want to mention is how you can get WordPress 5.5 and how you can try it out. The big thing, we just had beta 3 was released just this morning, or this afternoon, I guess, depending what, I guess we're all in the New York time zone, right? But WordPress 5.5 beta 3 was just released. And the way that you can go about getting this is through a plugin called beta testing. So what I would highly recommend doing at this point is you should always test your site on the new version before upgrading, and it's really awesome if you test it on the new version before it's released. So right now we're in beta mode, and what that means is that if bugs get reported, they can be fixed before any issues get released out into the wild. If everyone tests it on the day when WordPress 5.5 actually gets released, then we have to wait a while for those things to get fixed. So you can be an awesome community member by going ahead and trying WordPress 5.5 out. So what I'd highly recommend doing is almost all hosts these days offer some form of a staging site or something like that. So if you have a staging site, you want to go into that staging site and go to the plugins screen and hit add new. And you're going to want to search for beta testing. And you're going to see this WordPress beta tester plugin here. And you'll want to hit install and activate. And then you can go over to your dashboard screen, hit updates, and you can update to the latest version of WordPress 5.5, to the latest beta. You just hit update now. And then, yeah, you can go through, try all the different features in your themes, or if you develop plugins, or you have custom client sites, everything like that. You can go find those out. Then what you can do is you can wander over to the WordPress support forums. So you go to wordpress.org, hit support, and you can go into forums. And then you want to scroll down to alpha/beta/RC. And so this is the forum for reporting issues with WordPress 5.5 when it's in beta, or for the next release, every single release. And you'll see it's starting to pick up activity just as the betas have started coming out. And then it's just a whole bunch of posts that happened then. And everyone looks at this a lot to make sure that any issues that are reported, try and get them fixed before the actual release comes. So this is, if you want to get more involved, this is a great way to do it. It can be pretty simple. So with that being said, let's get started. One of the really cool features that is new in this release is something that's been in progress for 8 years. There's a great plugin called Easy Theme and Plugin Upgrades. And what that plugin lets you do is lets you upgrade WordPress plugins by adding a new plugin. So you can just upload the new version of that plugin immediately, and it updates it for you. Believe it or not, that's not a feature that has been in WordPress for a long time. But what's new to WordPress 5.5 is that you can now do this in WordPress core without the need for any plugins. Oh, that's not the zip file I want. I want this one. So right now I am uploading the user switching plugin, and I just have this zip file. And if I go to install now, I'll see a new screen in WordPress. And it's telling me that this plugin has already been installed. It's telling me what the current version of my plugin is. And it'll also flag for me what the required WordPress version is. This plugin doesn't have one. And the required PHP version. And it'll prevent me from uploading a newer version of this plugin that would break my site. If I see this screen and I want to go ahead and finish that update process, I just hit replace current with uploaded. And then WordPress is going to update that plugin for me all in the background. So most of the time, you'll be using plugins that update through the WordPress.org update system. But for the ones that don't, sometimes with custom plugins, sometimes, unfortunately, there's still third-party plugin authors that don't provide automatic one-click updates in WordPress core. So now that'll make that flow a whole lot nicer. You don't need to deactivate the plugin anymore, or upload it over with SFTP or anything like that. It should be much simpler for those use cases. The other big thing to do with updates in WordPress 5.5 is auto updates. As Mervyn said, what I do in my day job with WordPress is I work on iTheme Security, which is a security plugin. One of the things we find is that huge portions of compromised WordPress sites happen because people are running a plugin that is out of date and has known vulnerabilities. And one of the reasons for that, I mean, it can be difficult to remember to update plugins. Sometimes there are major vulnerabilities with plugins, and if you don't update within a day or two, your site could be compromised. You might have lots of plugins in your site, and you don't want to go every single morning and update every single one of them, things like that. So what you can do now in WordPress 5.5 is you can enable automatic updates. And so we can go over here, and we can say to CoBlocks, for instance, we have this new column that says automatic updates, and I can click enable automatic updates. And now let's see that my automatic update is scheduled in 5 hours for this plugin. And so what that means is in the background, WordPress will auto update any plugins that you have selected here for you. And you don't have to do anything. It'll check if they updated. If there are any updates available, they'll install them right away for you. What I'd highly recommend doing is enabling this for as many plugins as possible. On my site, I enable auto updates for every single plugin. I would highly recommend it. The way that you can kind of make that simpler is if you check this checkbox here, you can select a whole bunch of plugins. And then let's say we don't want to automatically update WooCommerce, for instance. We can use the bulk actions update menu to select enable auto updates and then hit apply. And now auto updates have been enabled for all of those plugins, which is really neat. This isn't just for plugins. This was also added to themes. For themes, it's a little bit harder to find. You have to do one more extra click. You go into the theme menu, and then you'll see a button or a link, excuse me, that says enable auto updates. And it's the same thing. For this, I believe you have to do it one by one. There's not a way to do it for all of them. But you can definitely go about doing that. I would highly recommend it. If you're using, the one thing to be careful of is if you've made theme modifications without using a child theme. It's highly recommended to use child themes if you're going to be making a modification to your theme. If you don't know about it, we've done presentations about it. You can probably find them at WP-NYC. You can find them on WordPress.tv, all over the place. That'll teach you how to use child themes. So if you're not using a child theme and you're manually editing your theme's template files, I wouldn't enable auto updates. But for any other reason, I would highly recommend enabling auto updates. It's the biggest thing next to setting a secure password that you can do to keep your WordPress site safe. So I'd highly recommend that. There's another cool feature that was added to WordPress 5.5 called sitemaps. So you might have heard of what a sitemap is. Basically, but if you haven't, basically what it is it's a way to say to search engines like Google or Bing, things like that, all of the content on my site, you can find it from this one page. So until now in WordPress, you've needed to install a plugin to do that, something like Yoast SEO, which is the one that I use, or WordPress SEO, all-in-one SEO. There's a lot of SEO plugins. But now WordPress core comes with a simple built-in sitemap all by itself. And that's really awesome. So we can see on my site here, if I go to wp-sitemap.xml, or if I visit the robots.txt file, we'll see a link to the sitemap. And WordPress takes the step to make this human readable as well. So I can see, okay, here are all of the different sitemaps on my site. Here's the one for all the posts. Here's the one for all the pages, categories, and users. And so this is really neat. It makes it much easier for search engines to crawl your content effectively, and it's available now for all WordPress sites. If you're using a plugin like Yoast SEO or I believe Jetpack's SEO module, I believe some of them have decided to turn off WordPress's built-in sitemaps and just use their own. Others are going to be integrating on top of WordPress's sitemap feature, but it's really great. One thing to be aware of is that if your site is in search engines discourage mode, so if you have this discourage search engines from indexing this site clicked, then the sitemaps won't be visible. And that's so not to make it, we don't want to provide any hints to search engines when this mode is selected. So sitemaps will be disabled then, but otherwise they should be enabled and ready for you to use right away. And they should pretty much just operate in the background. You shouldn't need to think about them. They're always up to date. There aren't caching issues with them, anything like that. It's a pretty neat feature. The last feature that I want to talk about before moving on to the block editor is something called lazy loading. So the way this works is you might have a page, let's say, with tens, hundreds, thousands of images on it. And the way that your web browser normally works is the second that it loads the page, it goes through all of the images on your website and then tries to find every single image all at once. And this can lead to a whole lot of requests. It can increase the page load time. And especially if none of these images ever get used or ever get seen, it's a complete waste for the user. So what WordPress has added in 5.5 is lazy loading. And what this does is it works to make sure in combination with the browser that images won't be loaded until they're actually seen by the user or about to be seen by the user. This works right now, I believe, in Google Chrome and Firefox. I think it's coming to Safari later this year. But you'll see lazy loading is enabled here, but you probably won't even be able to tell the difference. If you can see it, I don't know if Zoom is even fast enough to pick it up, that the avatars that are over here, each of these is a distinct image. They're loading just in time. So I didn't have to wait for my browser to load all of them before the page came up. It's just loading them as I scroll. And so that can be really great if you have a lot of images in your site, or for comments and things like this. You might not think, oh, hey, this is a different image for every one. How does my website have 200 images on one page? I only use 2 in the post. It might be from things like comments that have avatars. And so this is really awesome. This is another feature that is just enabled by default. You shouldn't need to do anything to get it to work for your WordPress website. It should just happen. If you have an existing plugin, I believe Jetpack has a lazy loading feature. There's some other plugins that have lazy loading features. You can continue to use those if you want, but there really shouldn't be a need anymore. I believe Safari is intending to include lazy loading later this year. So there really shouldn't be a need for those anymore. And now it's just a way that is built completely into the browser. It's more performant. It works very well. It's pretty neat. So now I'm going to move on to the block editor features, what's new with Gutenberg. And there are a whole ton of them in this release. So I'm going to start with a couple of things. The first thing that you'll probably notice is that the Chrome, or kind of the button styles, the general look and feel of the editor is fairly different. Buttons have been changed, the colors, things are a little bit flatter, a little bit cleaner. There's not as many distracting borders and lines everywhere you click. It's a little bit nicer from a UI perspective, just looking at the page. It's not as overwhelming, at least for me. But there is a whole lot more going on under the scenes. One of the things I want to show you is something really cool called block patterns. So we have this plus icon up here for adding a block, and by default it opens up the blocks window. You can kind of see the previews. But what's new is this patterns tab. And what this patterns tab lets you do is insert a pre-configured set of blocks, so you don't need to make the layout yourself. So for instance, this large header and a paragraph, I can see a preview it over here, and if I want to get it into my WordPress site or into my WordPress page, I just click on it, and Gutenberg inserts it automatically for me. And so this is made up of a group block, cover block, a paragraph block, and another paragraph block. And I didn't have to do any of that configuring myself. WordPress has done it all for me. So we can go in here, and then we can just make changes like it was any other block. It's here in this site, and it's just another block, and it was created for me without me having to do any work. Another one for this is that I find that's kind of nice is the 3 columns of text with buttons. So you can kind of use this for features or for different call to actions, different ways to see more information. And before, this would be something that can be kind of annoying to insert. You have to deal with columns and nested blocks and adding all these things for you. But here, WordPress, again, has just done this all automatically for me. And it's just ready for me to edit, ready for me to go in and make any changes that I want to, which is pretty cool. Right now, the list of block patterns is fairly small. So WordPress comes with, I think it's like 10 or so patterns by default. But what's really cool is that plugins and themes can also register their own patterns. So this is the patterns that we have for now, but I would fully expect to see plugins like CoBlocks or Atomic Blocks and theme developers who are really on top of it, adding patterns that will be available for you to do that might be more customized for the theme or customized for their blocks. Of course, WordPress is here only using the blocks that are built into WordPress, but because you can have hundreds or thousands of blocks, third-party authors will be able to make really, really rich block patterns, which I think is really exciting. Another really cool feature, I think, is the block directory inserter. So let's say I want to find a block that has something to do with the starry sky. I just searched for the blocks, and you notice the first time when it happened, it didn't see that there are any blocks available on my site that are already installed that would do that for me. But then what WordPress just did is WordPress reached out to WordPress.org and searched through the WordPress.org block directory. And it searched for plugins or blocks that match my query. And here's one that's returned to me is the Starscape block. So let's try this out. I just hit add block. And what's happening now is in the background, WordPress has installed that plugin for me automatically, activated it, and inserted that block into my post. I didn't have to go to the plugin screen. I didn't have to search on WordPress.org, search Google for plugins, anything like that. All I did was search for a block that I wanted to, and WordPress took care of the rest. And so you can see now this is a block provided by Automatic, and it's a kind of version of the cover block, but if this is picked up over Zoom nicely, you can see the stars are rotating in the background, and I can put whatever text I want here. I think that's pretty cool. If I were to remove this block from my page, let's say, hey, I don't like this one, it's actually not what I wanted, WordPress would also take care of deactivating that plugin and uninstalling it. So you can feel free to look through as many different blocks as you want and add them to your site and remove them, and you don't have to worry about your WordPress site getting overloaded with a whole bunch of junk. The way that this block directory is built is has fairly strict requirements as well. So part of the requirements is that these are blocks that they can't have upsells or ads thrown all over the place. They won't have a whole bunch of things cluttering your backend and making your WordPress site more cramped. They're supposed to be blocks that are just that, just single blocks ready for you to use. So you can safely go through this list and just install whatever you want and play around with it, which is really neat in my opinion. Something else that's changed with the UI of things is the way you can drag blocks around. So if I go over here and I select this block and then I start to drag, previously this would try and drag like a full version of the block around. That could kind of be a little bit kludgy to use sometimes. But now I can just scroll and just drop this single individual kind of, I think it's referred to as a chiclet. And I think that also makes the drag and drop experience much nicer. And there are a whole bunch of these kind of smaller quality of life improvements to how you go around interacting with things. So for instance, this Sir Knight, I'm right now editing this text. If I wanted to go ahead and edit the background, something that I can do is hover over the block here and then go up. And so this is selecting the parent block, and it's selected the cover. And so if you've ever fiddled around trying, especially in things like columns, trying to figure out, oh, how do I select this? How do I select that? You can now use this really handy dandy block selecting feature. And I think it's really well done. It makes things a lot easier to use. Another one of these cool quality of life things is multiple block selection. You've always been able to select multiple blocks, or at least as long as I can remember, but you kind of lacked features. If you use the group block, you could apply some things to the group, but that could complicate things unnecessarily if you just wanted to make changes to multiple blocks at once. So now you can do that. If you select multiple blocks now of the same type, you'll get their controls available here for you. And if I make any changes here, they apply to all of the blocks I've selected. So I don't need to go and configure each one manually. I can just select as many blocks as I want, or as few as I want, and make those changes all at once. I think that's another cool quality of life improvement. Another thing that's new is how preview works, as Mervyn alluded to in the beginning. So this used to just take you directly to the front end of your website, and that still works. We can see what I'm looking at so far. But now you can also preview directly what this might look like on different sizes. So WordPress provides a tablet experience, and it kind of shrinks the content area to see what this looks like for tablets, as well as a mobile experience. And you can see what my post looks like on mobile. And I can do all of that without leaving the editor. I don't have to drag and make my browser window bigger or smaller to try and get that to happen. I can just use that one button, which is really neat. Let's go back to desktop. The other kind of global change that I wanted to mention is the code editor view. If you tried to use this before, it could be kind of complicated. Ooh, that block has a lot in the code editor view. But what you might notice that's new is this is now all in monospace font. It looks a lot easier to use, and it pays attention to the size of the editor. So I'm no longer stuck in really cramped small space if I don't need to be. And so you can see this is how you can, if you're a more technical user, make some more technical changes without going through the UI. So I'm going to take a look at some of the blocks that have changed. This is a really neat feature to the image block. This is an image that I have added into my post, but it's not from my site. It's coming from another person's site. And you can see that if we go into the edit as HTML, that this is an image pulling from, looks like Positively Naperville. But let's say I want to bring that image actually into my site. I don't want to be hot linking from someone else. That's not a nice thing to do. The way I can do this now is by just tapping this one button that says Upload External Image. And what this is now doing is it fetched that image from that site and then it added it to my media gallery. And so now this is a part of my site. And so we can see that if we look at the edit as HTML, you can see that this is now on my demo.test site. And all I had to do was one button press. Another really, really cool feature that has to do with images is inline editing. So you might be aware that WordPress has had a way to edit images. If you go into the media library, you can kind of do this. We can see that image here that I just uploaded, and you can hit Edit Image. And you get this screen to do some crops and rotations, things like that. But if you're you have to go to a completely different screen to do this. If you're making edits of like, hey, I want to bring this image into my post, and I want to edit for this post content, you don't really have a great way to do that. You have to go all the way back to the media library, do the edits there, then hope that it's right, and then go back and forth and back and forth. What's new in WordPress 5.5 is now I can just do this editing inline. So I can hit this crop tool, And then this will give me a couple of different things. I can scroll to zoom the image. So I've zoomed that in a bit more. I can select a desired crop aspect ratio. So let's say we want to make this 16 by 9. I could do that, or 4 by 3, whatever I want. We can make it square. And I can even rotate that image, all from within my editor. So let's hit apply. And there we go. WordPress made that edit. It did that all in line. I didn't need to go anywhere else to do it. It's just there for me. Another feature that has been improved is the cover block itself. So this block pattern that we have, this is just a variation or a pre-customized version of the cover block. And what's new in WordPress 5.5 is a way to align this content. So I have this new button here that says change content position. And I can now move the content in this cover block to anywhere within the cover that I want. So let's say here I want to put it in the top left or in the top center. I can do that. There's also been new additions to the inline formatting menu. So let's say I want to make BC here subscript. I can do that now. And if I want to make it superscript, I could do that too. Another new feature is gradient background. So we've had gradient backgrounds before, but now they're available in more places. I can make those. Oh, it looks like my theme might not have them enabled. Let's see. Oh, no. There it is. Okay. Yeah. So in this column block, for instance, I can set a gradient, and that gradient now applies across the entire columns block. This, I would say, use carefully. You can very much wind up with content that is completely unreadable if you're not paying very close attention. But for those of you who miss the days of gradients all over your website, you can do that now in more places in WordPress. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to cover. No, yeah, I think those are the main features that I wanted to cover for WordPress 5.5. There are a whole bunch of new big Gutenberg changes that are also going to be coming, hopefully in WordPress 5.6, that you might have heard people talk about in the past. The navigation screen, which has been a big thing happening, as well as widget screen. That isn't in WordPress 5.5 yet, but it is slated to be included in WordPress 5.6 at the moment, as well as the first takes at full site editing, using the Gutenberg block editor to edit your entire site with Gutenberg, should also be coming in WordPress 5.6. So I think this is a pretty exciting release for Gutenberg block features, and WordPress 5.6 is shaping up to be pretty exciting as well. So with that, we can open up to questions. If anyone has any questions about the changes to WordPress 5.5, I'd be happy to try and answer as many of those as we can, or about Gutenberg in general. That'd be totally okay as well.
Great. Yep. I've got a couple lined up for you, and then we'll see how many more come in. Jack asked if there's any kind of notification for plugins that are on auto update. If you have a plugin that has auto update selected, you won't see a notification in the admin. But what WordPress will do is when it does the automatic updates, it will tell you all of the plugins that have been automatically updated. So it'll send you an email, and that'll send to the admin email that you've configured. So this is another reminder. We talked about recovery mode earlier this year, or excuse me, actually last year. But this is another reason why it's important to make sure your administration email address is up to date. But yeah, WordPress will generate an email for you. It'll tell you which plugins got updated and to which versions.
and if anything went wrong. If you want notifications that are inside the admin, you really need other plugins to do that for you. Stream is a free example. The plugin I work on does that lots of different ways. You could do that if you want the notifications in the admin.
Yep. And follow-up to that is there any benefit to waiting a few days to do updates as opposed to doing them automatically?
Yeah, so I think it's I want to be careful about doing too much self-promotion. But yeah, I think that can be a concern. There are sometimes plugins like that are very important and very big, let's say like WooCommerce, that you might want to delay updates for. And our plugin gives you a way to do that. So you can say, hey, automatically update this plugin after 3 days or after 5 days or however long as you want. As well as the other part of that is that you want to make sure that if there is a plugin with a vulnerability, that it does get automatically updated immediately. And that's also a feature that the plugin that I work on can do. If you don't, you kind of have to pay attention to the blogs. If you look at WordFence and their blog and sign up for their email newsletter and Securi, that'll get you some of them. But yeah, if you are going to manually do it and wait a few days, you have to really be on top of things, because unfortunately with some of these really major security problems with plugins that happen sometimes, if you haven't updated within a day or two, it can be too late sometimes. Your site might already be compromised.
Gotcha. Kleinfeld asks, does the preview currently show content from shortcodes?
What preview do you mean? Oh, do you mean the device previews? No, this is just changing really the content editor size. It's not rendering blocks. So if you still have shortcodes that you're using and you're using the shortcode block, it won't reflect those changes in the preview. I would say if you have any influence over it, I think now is the time to, now has been the time to upgrade those shortcode blocks into real WordPress Gutenberg blocks. So pester your plugin authors, your theme authors.
I think there's some dependencies that might be incorporated in that question. There's also the mixed bag of, yes, some shortcodes will render, some other shortcodes will not. So
I'm not sure of any shortcodes that would render in the block editor automatically, unless they've been customized to have their own block. But yeah, I don't, yeah. You really essentially need to turn those into dynamic blocks for them to properly do that. If you're just using like the /shortcode block, you won't get that. So if you have like some my shortcode, if you have something like that, it won't unfortunately render.
Steve, do you have any questions lined up?
I just had one. I thought it was pretty cool with the block directory that you can add add a block, test it out, and if you don't like it, you can remove the block, and WordPress will deactivate the plugin. Does that work across pages? So if I've already used that block on another page, and I'm using it here, and I decide I want to remove it, will WordPress recognize that's being used someplace else?
Not yet. So if you have multiple people who are previewing the same block at the same time, it's not yet aware of all the places that that block is being used. That's something that we're looking at for 5.6.
Okay, what is previewing defined as? If I have a page that's published that's using that block, and then I use it on another page, is that still considered?
So once you leave, like once you've updated, once you've like done whatever you need to do, it's not going to remove that block anymore. It's only if you are adding that block and then you remove that block from the post editor before you've saved things.
So the first time you've used that block after installing it from the block directory.
While you're still on this page, yeah. So if yeah. So if I, for instance, remove the Starscape block now, I can then go ahead. Let's make sure this isn't a demo fail. But yeah, I can now go ahead and use it again without any issue.
Got another one. Patrick asks, will the blocks be treated as themes, for instance? They're all from WP, not offered through third parties.
Well, so almost every single block, but any block from the block directory is third party by definition. So if you go over to WordPress.org and go to plugins, everything on this page, essentially, with the exception of a couple, are third party. And it's the same for blocks. All of those are third party. And that's true with themes as well. There's only really like, 11 themes from WordPress that are from WordPress officially. Everything else is from third-party contributors, third-party developers. So yeah, anything that you're installing from the block directory is coming from a third-party developer.
So Steve, to clarify, I was looking at the Starscape block template, for instance, when he brought it in. I thought, would there be any imaging issues in there, or in the build of that particular block template that might need updating that would come from something other than the regular version, WordPress version update? In other words, could it break because it's a particular build?
No. So the blocks that are searched through the block directory, that block that gets inserted into your post is based on the actual block definition, the actual block JavaScript that's happening. It's not like pre-built for a particular version of Gutenberg or anything like that. It's using the same underlying APIs as if you installed that plugin manually and then shows the block from the inserter. So there shouldn't be any issues like that unless the plugin is no longer compatible with that latest version of WordPress. Yeah, all of that data is coming from WordPress.org and it's all dynamic. So there shouldn't be any issues like that.
So besides the patterns, is there anything else in 5.5 that would help manage reusable blocks?
No. So one of the things that has been talked about and is kind of in planning is a feature for managing blocks in a more robust interface. I'm probably not going to be able to find this right off the top. Let's maybe search for it. But there is plans for a kind of block management admin screen that's much more thorough. But that has not landed in this version of WordPress. I think it's still something that people are interested in doing. Yeah, this is the post. So there's plans to add something like this where you would be able to have a much more robust WordPress admin experience for managing blocks and installing blocks and doing all of those kinds of things. But that does not yet exist in WordPress 5.5. See if this loads. But yes, this is kind of the idea of having a centralized block screen. Places to go around and adding new blocks and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't exist yet.
All right. Well, great. Well, I see Hefe has been answering some questions on the chat, and we'll, of course, bring back any straggling questions for Tim at the end. But
yeah, to answer Sharon's question, none of that would affect the site speed. That wouldn't have any issues. But yeah.
The blocks, like the number of blocks and stuff?
Pulling in things from the block directory or, yeah, even just the number of blocks, they're not going to have an impact on the front end of your website, really of any noticeable kind, unless they're being used.
Great. All right.
To answer Eva's question, I'm not sure entirely what you mean. There are default styles in the core blocks. those already exist. If I believe your theme can opt in or opt out of those. So if you're not seeing them for your theme, then they're not available specific to your theme, but WordPress does include them. I can't speak to Elementor in terms of whether Elementor will have incompatibilities. It's possible. Elementor is a very heavy page builder, so it wouldn't surprise me if it does, but they're usually pretty responsive about updating to the latest version of WordPress.